Everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for being here today. I'm Reggie Tidwell. I'm the founding president of the Asheville AIGA chapter. Thanks for being here online and also in person. Just wanted to say we've got some exciting events coming in the upcoming days and months and weeks. It's going to be an exciting year for us to get together in person. This is super cool. We had our first social yesterday, which was well attended. So it was nice to see a lot of familiar faces and new faces. So I'm hoping that trend continues. And if you are not currently a member of AIGA, please consider. You can join for as little as $50 a year. Membership helps our chapter be able to put on more content, more events like this, and even larger events, which we have in the works. So please consider. And I'm going to hand this over to our wonderful John Hornsby. Let's have a wonderful discussion with our awesome panelists.
All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for joining us in person and online. I see Sarah's here from Mexico online, so that's pretty awesome. So here we are. This is our first getting back together in person, our first attempt at doing something hybrid. As such, it may be glitchy, so I do ask for your patience if you're tuning in online. If it's not the optimal experience, this is our first attempt, so it is what it is. We'll do our best and roll with it if something goes wrong. I do want to real quickly just take a quick moment to shout out to some of our sponsors who make it possible for us to be here. Then I'll introduce our panelists and we'll kind of get on with the show. First off, the Foundry Hotel is where we are in person today. Big thank you to them. They've been a sponsor of ours since we founded this chapter and have stuck with us even through the pandemic and as we're able to come back in person here. So big thanks to the Foundry for allowing us to use the space. David Huff is taking photography for us today, so big thank you to David. Ask him about his zombie movie ideas later when you get a chance. And Jamie Daniels, also big thank you to Jamie and the Daniels group. She has helped out with a lot of the printing as well as being on our board and volunteering at the event. And so big shout out to her. Also, Alyssa Phillips, our vice president, is serving as the chat moderator for this event on the Zoom side. So if you have questions for our panelists as we move along and you're online, feel free to drop those into the chat. We'll have a Q&A at the end. AIGA, we do have a sort of a code of conduct that our events adhere to. Alyssa has dropped that in the chat, but basically play nice with each other and don't be a jerk, and we should be fine. So with that out of the way, let us move on to our panelists. I do want to welcome back, for those who don't know, you probably know at this point, but we gathered together a year ago. We were like 3 months into the pandemic, and of course, everyone was freaking out, including us. And so we decided to get together with a sort of diverse panel of entrepreneurs, marketing professionals, creatives, and just sort of grapple with how to market during that time of crisis. And we thought it would be interesting, as we're now emerging from that, to come back together and both look back at how the last year affected us and our businesses and our clients, what sort of pivots we had to do, what we thought would work that did or didn't, and what we think is good, smart marketing moving forward with what we've learned from the past year. So we have with us, I'm going to cheat on my notes here because our chat moderator has to drop this stuff in the chat at the same order, and I don't want to throw her a curveball. So we're going to welcome first Aisha Adams. We also have Nicole Harefield. We have Nathan Jordan. And we have Catherine Campbell. I don't want to steal their thunder and tell you too much about what they do and what they're up to, because I want them to do that. So I do want to start it off just kind of asking, and we'll start with Aisha, if that's okay, and then go from there. But if you could just real briefly kind of share with us who you are, what you do, and how this past year has really impacted your approach to business and marketing.
Hey, everybody. I'm Aisha Adams, the founder of Equity Over Everything, Aisha Adams Media Group, and the Lenore Ryan Equity and Diversity Institute. And I don't think my marketing has shifted much since the pandemic, but the big thing I've had to do is be extremely consistent and to be more thoughtful about how often I show up online and how often I show up on community. And I've had to buckle down and just be more selective. And so I just say more. I think that would be like the key word. Just post more, show up more, give more is what I've had to do.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm just going to forego the mic. I don't think we really need it in here. I can talk loud. So Nicole, if you could also introduce yourself, tell us about Moonlight Makers and how has this past year impacted your business and your approach to marketing?
Oh my gosh. I'm Nicole Harefield. I'm the co-founder of Moonlight Makers along with Claire Watson. We make t-shirts and we have a retail store downtown. We're online, Etsy, Amazon, Shopify. We do wholesale. I mean, we have so many aspects to our business. So this year impacted us. I mean, there's no way to even say how much this year impacted us. It was the most transformative year in all ways, personally, professionally, any way that I could ever imagine. And for the first time in terms of marketing, we handed over our social media to a media group as soon, like maybe like 2 months ago, we were just like, okay, we have to hire our weaknesses. We are just trying to be kinder to ourselves this year because last year was just so much. It was just so much. So yeah, hiring weaknesses and just kind of handing things over, trying to be flexible.
Flexibility has been so key,
Yeah.
I think, this past year, more so than ever. And then, Catherine, if you could share with us what's going on in your world this past year.
Hi, I'm Catherine Campbell. In this past year, I blew up my entire life. I actually ended up closing my business. After 6 wonderful years running a very successful PR and marketing agency for sustainable food, beverage, and hospitality retail brands, I decided to close up shop last fall. And at the same time that I did that, I was offered the position to be the first marketing director for Wild Sam Field Guides, which is an award-winning American travel brand that's based in Austin, Texas. And I would say that, you know, it was a really big decision. The decision came at the perfect time. For those of you who attended the panel last year, I mentioned at that time that my agency had lost literally half of its business overnight during the pandemic, with the restaurant closures, bar closures, a lot of stores having to shutter their doors and not knowing whether they were going to come back. During that time last summer, we thought our agency would bounce back through a combination of a couple of things. One, waiting for contracts to resume because the pandemic was going to end any day now. And two, rolling out an online education program in marketing for small businesses. So trying to basically diversify our revenue streams. Unfortunately, that revenue stream wasn't taking off as quickly as we needed it to. And it was very clear that this pandemic didn't have an end in sight. And instead of compromising our values and our interests and going toward marketing for any old business. We could have pivoted our whole agency to cater toward marketing for pharma or dentistry or medical or technology, where there is good big money to be made for agencies. But our heart wasn't in that. And we didn't want to sacrifice our values and our alignment with who we were as people to be able to do that. So I saw the writing on the wall and said, hey, after 6 years, let's end on a good note, close down. And then right around the corner was a dream job waiting for me, and I didn't know it yet. So it was really tough. It took several months to shut down the business. Whenever I tell people it's easy to open up a business, it's actually harder to shut down one. I was onboarding and starting my new career with Wild Sam. And I would say that the key word over the past year has been alignment. We've, had to constantly ask ourselves, what are our values? What do we stand for? What do we want to be aligned with? Who do we want to be aligned with? And that if I keep coming back to that question in my marketing and in my life overall, I always find the answer waiting for me. So.
Well, I just really want to thank you for being here and being willing to be vulnerable and open about, having to deal with closing your business. Because I know that's something that many people have had to deal with on various levels. And so I think it's really important to have that perspective and to, show that oftentimes when one door closes, another door opens up. So I'm glad to hear that that was the case for you. So Nathan, if you could share with us, you've also gone through some changes, I know, so tell us about how the past year has impacted you.
Okay, great. Hey, everybody, I'm Nathan Jordan. For the past 8 years, I've been the creative director for a full-service advertising agency based here in Asheville called Market Connections. Most of the work that I've done with them has focused on the travel and tourism sector. And yes, like Catherine, I've recently had a big shift and left Market Connections and started my own creative agency with a partner, Bryn Dendy, who's here today. We're a creative content and advertising studio. And I think, to sum up the past year working in the travel and tourism sector, I think if I had to put a single word on it, it would be nimble. And if I had to make it a phrase, it would be a nimble pivot. So we talked last year about, during the conversation about creating tourism advertising campaigns that tell visitors not to come, and how challenging that was. I never thought I'd be faced with things like that. And, I was so naive then because things continued to change dramatically and quickly. And, with the phased reopening of things and with challenges and restrictions and things like that, kind of entering the lexicon of things we needed to communicate while still, providing a compelling creative message to our visitor audience. I was constantly sitting in board meetings or creative, content meetings and saying, we need to be nimble. We have to pivot. There's this new set of rules or this new set of challenges, or, this state that we're marketing in has XYZ set of rules and XYZ going on, as it relates to the pandemic. And, here on the ground, we've got, a whole different set of challenges. So yeah, the past year really, was all about being nimble for me. And, I also think, as things shifted so quickly and as life in a sort of very strange way slowed down and allowed everybody to kind of take a little bit of a step back and a more of maybe a global perspective inwardly for their family life, for their professional life. I had the opportunity to kind of look at that critically and say, well, what am I doing now? I've been creative director for a full service agency doing all kinds of things, and is that really resonating with what I want to do? And I've always wanted to own my own business. And so, and I've always wanted to be able to focus on the things that I'm truly good at and not, split myself into a million pieces and try and be everything to everyone. So, the pandemic gave me a little bit of space, and in a way, it's kind of oddly a blessing in that way, where I was able to kind of make that decision and make a nimble pivot in my career as well. So, yeah, that kind of sums it up for me, John.
Well, I remember having lunch with you about 5 years ago or so, and you're like, yeah, you know, sometimes I think about I might start my own thing. So congratulations
Thank
on
you.
taking that leap
Thank you.
during these. Is it okay to say unprecedented times again yet? Has enough time gone by since everybody said that? That was the big joke last year. And I'll just share briefly a little bit too about our experience, because also went through a lot of changes like that. I was working full-time, managing a signs and graphics and marketing center in town, and then was let go during the pandemic, and had to do that sort of pivot back to, I had my freelance business, I kind of dialed it down to almost zero. So I had to turn the volume up on that real quick at a time when, you know, we're in the same sort of community here with AIGA. Everyone's like, I just lost half my clients. It's not an ideal time to try and fire back up. And then my wife and I came up with this concept to do these connection kits, where we worked with conferences and communities and events that had to make that shift to virtual, to put together kits of content to mail out. And so we sort of dove into that. That really carried us through the past year between that and the design work. It turned out, again, to be one of those kind of blessings in this, disguised as a crisis. That for us, you know, if I had to pick one word, it would be balance, because we had to really balance having 2 kids at home, you know, not being able to go to school, my wife being immunocompromised, so us being on a little more on the conservative side of behaviors, and how to manage all of that without totally stressing ourselves out and make money. And we were able to sort of achieve that balance of like not having to stress about money, not having to stress about having to work so hard to get that money, and to still be able to have time to spend with family, and just time to sort of not have to be hustling all the time. I realized I've definitely very much internalized capitalism of like feeling like I always have to be busy to have value. And so this past year really helped me to refocus on not on working on that, sort of doing that internal work of like, I have value even if I'm relaxing. Like, it's okay to relax sometimes. So let's move on to pandemic pivots. Let's talk about that a little bit. What kind of, did you have any sort of, you know, major pandemic pivots that you had to do, you know, last time we talked or in the year since then? And of those, what aspects of that do you think will stick going forward, or might have just been for that moment in time, and now you're thinking you have to pivot in a different way going forward? Aisha, would you like to, I know you said you didn't have to have a lot of changes, but.
I didn't have a lot of changes then because I felt like, this is new. I've not done the double thing. So this is new for me.
It's totally new for us too, so.
So this is different. And then, and then it's like, I just was very, very lucky. If you're an entrepreneur, you know that people always say it's about timing. So it's like, like my mom used to always tell me, like, if I would have had you in the 70s, things would be a lot better for you, kid, like all my life, right? So there was a moment in time where the work that I had been doing became extremely relevant. And so I was just already in place. So it wasn't that like, that's why I didn't have to pivot, because I was already like on this alternative path. I was already working 4 days from home. I was already doing all of those things. So now for me coming out of this and trying to identify the behaviors, right? So like I was just at an event where there were like 600 people yesterday. And then today people are feeling more conservative in this community. So for me, it's about really understanding each community And it's not necessarily a pivot, it's just being deeply concerned, deeply caring, deeply involved and engaged in the process of the communities that I choose to be a part of, and figure out how best to show up, right? So I'm gonna leave here today, go get my family, and I'm gonna go to Grindfest. And there are gonna be thousands of, hundreds of people there. So it's like understanding that my marketing community is gonna be more conservative, and understanding that maybe then my community where I serve is going to be less conservative. And how do I show up in all of those communities and get it right? So not necessarily pivoting, but continuing to be deeply present and deeply concerned about the community that I want to be a part of, and showing up as a member of that community and giving them the best that I have to give that meets the standard and the culture of the community.
Wow, that's good. Yeah, that it's being able to sort of read the room, so to speak, of the community that you're in, and it's different times and arrangements require showing up, authentically, but attuned to that. Nicole, how about you? What sort of pandemic pivots? I know you have a retail operation, so you've been through the whole shutting down, opening up, masks, all that kind of stuff. So talk to us a little bit about that. No
Okay. So we did have to pivot a lot. Like I said, we're online in a bunch of ways. Online was fine. Amazon is our main source of revenue. And so Amazon actually went up like crazy during this. I mean, everyone was at home, that was coming in. So that was the thing that really saved us during the scariest time. Amazon handmade, I should say, not just Amazon, because I know a lot of people are anti-Amazon. We're on the handmade side, which when you're shopping on Amazon, you don't even really know when you're buying something handmade unless you really look at the words. So just so you know, Amazon handmade.
We need a webinar.
Okay.
I'm just gonna stop, we all need a webinar.
Okay, we can do that.
I just told her, everybody, we all need a webinar on Amazon Handmade so that we can begin to understand the handmade community, our handmade community, and how we serve that community here, and how we show up for you here.
Thanks, that's so great. Well, we started with Amazon Handmade basically when they started. So we are actually like buddies with them. They flew us out to New York City one time just as kind of like a pilot program at during the holidays in Bryant Park. It's really cool. But we had to close our retail store for 200 days. We could have closed it for a little bit less, but no one wanted to work in retail. I mean, no one wanted to be face-to-face. Plus we have a team of like 13 other people who are screen printing and, graphic designers and things. And we didn't want to worry them either. So we just kept it closed 200 days. We didn't do any events. If you've ever seen our little turquoise short bus that we take out to events, we've been doing it for about 6 years, mostly in Pritchard Park and Leaf Festival. We had to, not do that at all last year. And we had to lay everyone off for 8 weeks. And just my business partner, Claire, went in with one screen printer and just did all of the work the whole time for that amount of time, which was crazy. I was home with 3 kids, a 2-year-old, and then 2 school-age children. So I was doing all of that plus trying to work. And it was, nothing can make you, I don't know if it's like burnt out and also feel stronger than going through something that hard. In that moment, I would have never thought it could be positive, but we didn't have a babysitter or any childcare for 9 months. So it was crazy. But yeah, so much pivoting. And also something that happened to us was we decided that we looked at our sales and we realized that pop culture types of things were working the best right now. Like people really were wanting to buy relevant things. We have a lot of veggie puns and things like that. If you know any of the stuff that we do, it's kind of silly, but we made a few Schitt's Creek designs, and fold in the cheese was one. It just says fold in the cheese, period. And it went viral during Christmas and we could not keep up with the demand. I mean, it was, we sell just like a, small amount of orders every day. This was off the charts. We had to have 2 people full-time just screen printing, folding the cheese towels like day and night. We had several people who went out of town for Thanksgiving, so we didn't let them come back in because they were with people indoors without masks. So we were down to about half of our staff, and then our operations manager got COVID. So we had to shut down our whole operation during this like viral product that we had. And only Claire and myself went in and shipped every single order and did everything, got everybody back in after negative COVID tests, and then, you know, finished out the December. But we're still not over December, how crazy it was. But it did provide us the funds to expand our building. Now we're all the way from Rankin to Lexington on Walnut. So we expanded, we have more space, everything is good now, but it was a very challenging time.
That sounds crazy.
It was.
It sounds like your word was probably not balance at that time.
That's why my word was transformation.
Right.
The positive spin on,
Yes.
on what it was.
Catherine, obviously you shared about, sort of major pivot of shutting down the business and going to work for Wild Sam. Do you want to expand on that at all from either of those perspectives?
Yeah, I'd love to. So just to give everybody a timeline. So I was running my agency up until well, technically I was running my agency, the doors open to the public until the end of October of 2020. I onboarded with Wild Sam at the end of 2020, it just hit the ground running. Closing the business officially behind the scenes took until this year's tax season. So it took about another 5 months or so to fully shut down the business. And that was just helping clients transition out, helping them find the tools that they need, really, not trying to, I've always had a very deep working relationship with every single one of our clients. I have been to, it was really important to me that it wasn't just a high and buy situation, that I really left them in a good place with, and not just shopping them out to another agency or taking a cut off our finder's fee or something to, give them to somebody else. That's really shitty. Sorry, but it is. So I just wanted to make sure that they were taken care of individually, and each felt like that their exit plan was tailored to them. So it took a while. And at the same time, I'll speak to how Wild Sam was pivoted during this year, because coming into being hired as a marketing director for a travel brand during a pandemic had a big question mark. And I was up to the challenge. They were going through a period of growth. When I stepped into the role, they informed me that we sold more books in 2020. So we make travel guides that are little, I don't have any with me. They're in your kits. But we make story-driven travel guides that are deeply meaningful. We work with local contributors, local artists and illustrators to illustrate the books, local authors to write essays and fresh writing for the books and perspectives for the books. So it's all locally driven, and they're story-driven. They're basically travel guides that can read like a novel. And so when I started in this role, I was informed that, we had sold more guides in 2020 than we ever had as a brand, in the years existing since 2012. And that really spoke to what they were doing, and the work that they were doing that I was about to do, that I immediately stepped into from day one. I my first day on the job, they're like, all right, we're going to publish a guide to Napa and Sonoma, and it's our first book in our new series, and you're going to market it. And I'm like, sweet, give it to me. Let's do this. So it was, I think that one thing that we realized out of that was that they didn't necessarily have to pivot, but they were, again, it was a matter of timing. Wild Sam was doing something that no other travel guides were really doing, and had been doing this since day one, which was providing a way for people to, it wasn't a go see do, doorstop photos guide that rough guide that you carry around. It's a travel guide that reads like a novel, allowed people to travel internally, mentally, emotionally, even when they couldn't physically travel. And people were really planning for the day that those doors would reopen. So we had our biggest holiday season ever. But stepping in, it was really learning to talk about the brand in a consistent manner. So I brought in a lot of experience from my agency and started thinking about each book that we were publishing, like as a client. so it was each their little clients, and they each get their own little marketing plan. And so I was able to bring that experience and that expertise and that approach into the company. And we've had one of our best years ever. And obviously now we're the world is reopening, and so we're in a really good place there. But yeah, so that's what we did.
Can I just say something? So I'm just wondering, online and a show of hands in the room, how many of you have military experience or ROTC experience? Okay, so then you and I, we really understand what a pivot is, right? So a lot of people have been using the word pivot and they don't even know what it means. So I was a super ROTC nerd when I was in high school. I was on ROTC all 4 years and was Miss Junior ROTC 2 years in a row homecoming.
Nice.
Yes. So when you pivot, military, like as a military person, actually physically do a pivot, you never come off your feet. You have to stay in what you're doing, right? Like that's the physical definition of a pivot. You stay grounded, your heels stay grounded when you physically pivot. And I can show you guys after this if you want like a physical demonstration of this. But a pivot is a move that you do in marching. It's a move that people do when they're in the military. And so I was so frustrated because I would go into all these conversations and people would talk about pivot, but no one would ever really talk about what a pivot was. Pivot means staying grounded where you are, continuing doing what you're actually doing, like those marketing guides, and then thinking about ways to shift how they show up, not necessarily shift what you're doing. A pivot isn't, I used to make vodka, now I make hand sanitizer, right? That's not a pivot. That's what we were defining as a pivot. But a physical pivot is, we always done marketing guides. Now we're leaning in closer and we are just slightly shifting the weight of how we're doing things. Physically is the definition of a pivot. And I just want to say, we keep using the word pivot, and it occurs to me that very few people have ever actually pivoted physically with their feet to really understand the grounding of that word. And that's honestly the first time I've heard somebody talk about pivoting in the way that is in step with what it means to physically pivot your feet. So I just wanted to bring that up and say thanks for sharing that story, because I'm gonna instill it and tell people about it. And also to just say, like, to remind people, like, pivot is a real thing. It's not just some word that we keep using up here. It's something that you physically can do with your body and that you really need to think about as you do things with your business.
Thank you. Thank you. That's some great insight on pivoting. Nathan also went through a big change, changing jobs, roles. So what else do you want to say about any pandemic pivots, either previous role or the change of the role, or this is sort of a new venture for you now? And so what would you like to share around that?
Yeah, so I'll start with a specific example from my previous role. My previous agency handled all the marketing and communications for Tourism Development Authority here in Western North Carolina, Brevard and Transylvania County. And that's the example I actually used earlier as well of, having to create a campaign where we're asking visitors not to come. And we were faced with, this challenge of what message will resonate, what message is appropriate at this time. And, a wonderful thing actually happened last year. One of the only things that people could do to recreate, to have a good time, was to go out into public lands. And if you're familiar with Brevard, it's over half the land in Transylvania County where Brevard is located is public lands. So they saw record visitation. And with that visitation, we saw, lots of people discovering the forest and outdoor rec for the first time and really getting to experience that. But we also saw some negative effects with that as well. And there was a dramatic increase in littering, in misuse of the public lands. And, that was largely due to the fact that awareness was really low. Folks were visiting from major metropolitan areas who had never been in public lands before. And, we took a look at that and we said, well, what can we do to drive some awareness and some stewardship of our public lands? And we decided to focus on Leave No Trace. And if you guys are familiar with Leave No Trace, it's about, sustainability and, management and oversight of and use of public lands in a responsible way. And so we created a Leave No Trace campaign that blew up. It was picked up, and a partnership with a national organization was formed. The messaging was shared not only here in Western North Carolina, but kind of far and wide. And then, the state level tourism agency got really excited about that and developed their own campaign. And we worked with them to kind of consult with some of the messaging that they were doing. So we saw this massive pivot of being, working with a tourism agency and saying, hey, come visit and have a vacation and enjoy yourself, go rock climbing, mountain biking, fly fishing. And now all of a sudden we're helping these people understand things about sustainability and stewardship. And that blew up into this whole larger campaign that the state's now doing, that's having a lot of great positive effects. So that's an example of a pivot that happened that had some positive effects. And then I referenced also kind of, the ability to step back and assess my personal and work life. We've all kind of shared like the additional challenges that everyone's faced as a result of the pandemic, whether you're a mother or father or guardian, and raising a family, but also being a working professional and kind of juggling all that. And so that did allow me to kind of take that good step back and reassess what I wanted to be doing and how I wanted to kind of devote my time. You referenced that too, John. And then I'll use an example of a pivot that wasn't effective as well. Working in the travel and tourism sector for multiple clients, a lot of those agencies kind of became saddled with this communication task of, sharing information that government was putting out, and making sure that like, okay, these are all the phases. We're in this phase and these are all the restrictions. And then we were parroting that back out, after the state of North Carolina, for example, or the state of Virginia or the state of Florida would put out these rules and different things like that. We were constantly throwing that kind of messaging out there, and it was causing folks to disengage. So, that was a real challenge for us as in terms of something that didn't necessarily work, that we were sort of saddled with, and we tried to do the best job we could, but that's really just not their lane. So, doing something like focusing on sustainability and things that can resonate, diversity, inclusion also being another big messaging line that we pushed during this time. Those were the things that resonated and drove engagement. And that's the past year for me.
So you mentioned that you were kind of parroting out that sort of rules and regulations that were coming down from the state, and that was not positive response from that. Do you have a sense of why that was? Was it because it was like negative information or misaccurate, or what was going on there?
Right. So, when you think about a marketing organization, specifically a tourism authority, the type of messaging that you are there to absorb is about fun. It's about vacation. It's about recreation. It's about escape, right? Like the same kind of escape that like a Wild Sam field guide could offer, that was packaged and that you could interact with and have in your home. And so, we were at arm's length at times saying, don't come, and here are all these reasons you shouldn't come. And so, it was oddly placed, but it was the responsible thing to do. So I think folks were there to find their own sense of escape, and working with us and absorbing our content. And so it was a really delicate balance of something where we had to do it, but it wasn't really something that was very engaging for them. And we created a campaign I talked about last year called Explore Responsibly that had some rules and some fun infographics that tried to lighten the mood. But again, that's not why people, interact with an entity like that. They want to plan that future vacation. They want to look at the light at the end of the tunnel. And so that's what we needed to be for them during that time. And, they saw a record visitation when we made some of those pivots and changed our messaging to speak to some of these things that were about, sustainability and things that resonated with folks during that period of time, as opposed to doing the more cut and dried, like governmental stuff type messaging. So I think that's what drove it.
And I saw in the comments too, I think from Sarah on the chat here, just chiming in on Aisha's point earlier on kind of the difference between pivot and adapt. Are you pivoting? Are you adapting? They're kind of different things that you could get mixed up. In our case, I don't know whether you would call it a pivot or an adaptation, but, being from a design background, being from a background in special events was where I started my career, event marketing, being involved in the communities that I'm involved in with AIGA and Creative Mornings. The idea of shifting and continuing to do design work and branding and illustration and things like that, but also starting to offer the service of putting together the kits and sending them out wasn't like a huge, out of left field thing for us, because I came from that event world and I was involved in those communities. I saw the disconnects that were happening. And so it was just sort of a response that got some traction and worked for us. As we're emerging now, it's been an ongoing question, like, what are you going to do when stuff goes back to in person? Are you going to keep doing this? Do you think it's going to happen? How are we going to adapt to that? And I think, just to share what our thoughts are around that, obviously, we're sort of testing here today, sort of this can work in person as well. I think that boxes make sense for shipping, and if we had thought about it more, we would have done tote bags here instead of the boxes, because that's just trash, really. It's necessary for shipping. We want to be mindful of our environmental impact, so we want things to be useful. So those are ways that we're thinking of adapting as we're emerging now, is transitioning this into not only continuing to work with virtual events, but also ways that we can engage with in-person. The whole time it's sort of been the idea is it's a more elevated, more thoughtful alternative to just a swag bag that actually is more thematic and custom and has activities and things too. So I would like to hear about what do you think sort of the lasting impact of the pandemic in terms of creating that time to sort of step back, reflect, reevaluate your values and your methods. What do you think the lasting impact of that should be, that we sort of should continue to bring into how we think about business as usual? There's new normal has been this term that's been used in the past year for during the pandemic, but also sort of speculating about beyond the pandemic, what changes have come along that you think we should be reevaluating and reimagining what business as usual even means going forward. And I keep getting confused, messing up the order. So I'm going to start with Nicole and go in a line.
Okay, for us, we decided that we needed more wellness, like just take better care of yourself, sort of, epiphany after this, because Claire and myself had been hustling hard for 6 years. I mean, it was just the two of us on her kitchen counter, like screen printing with zero experience. We had 6 kids. I mean, well, at that point we had 4, then 5, then 6, between the 2 of us. And we just were, 7 days a week, hitting the ground running every day, texting whatever we needed to at night, customer service 24/7. We've worked really, really hard, and our team is really amazing and they work really hard. And we just realized that life is really short. You don't need to work like this. We've retained our values the whole time. Like, we always feel like we're really we've never decided to have our items printed overseas. We always decided we're going to do that ourselves. Even though it's grueling physical work for some people, we're trying to have them do half days screen printing, half days doing other things. We're just really trying to take care of ourselves and everyone else better. So we got, we're giving them more vacation time. We got a massage chair. We have staff lunches. We have body worker that comes in twice a month. We're just trying to do anything we can to keep everyone happy and taking better care of their bodies. We joined a kickball league, which I was sharing that a bunch of people got injured yesterday by doing it. So maybe it was the wrong thing, but we had so much fun. It was like joy, you need to keep that joy in your life, and it's not just all about work. And even though we love what we do because it's so creative, and I do all of the art. I love my job. I created my dream job. I'm so thrilled. But there is a sense of just hustling to get to work, hustling to get home, hustling with the kids, all the time hustle. So when John was talking about relaxing, when you said that, I was like, what is relaxing? What? I don't even really know if I can do it anymore, So we're like, okay, let's start with taking better care of ourselves and just make sure that the whole staff is kind of forced to a little bit,
Okay, just be like you. Okay, so we had that conversation. We were sort of having that as pre-table talk to the event, like the importance of taking care of staff. This weekend for Juneteenth, myself and I, we're going to Charlotte, and we're actually going to work out some of the kinks in our processes and systems. We hired a consultant to come in and just to work with us on that. But I think for me right now, I'm not sure what's going to stick, right? I am showing up in all these places to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. And people tell me that it's going to stick, but I don't think it's going to stick. I think we're doing all these things for wellness, and I think for some people it'll stick, but I'm not really sure it's going to stick because I live in America and we have the attention span of 15 seconds. If you have a 30-second video and I get bored for 1 second, I exit out of it. So the reality is I don't know what's going to stick. I'm just trying to be here, be present, and do the best that I can. And then, because this life thing is hard, support the people around me who are doing the best that they can, and trying to figure out what sticks because it has to, because we are definitely in a survival mode right now. Nobody wants to talk about how hard 2021 is. People, I have a son, and my son did not go to campus. He stayed home. It was the joy of my life. I'm that crazy mom that was super glad that I got to have time with my son, and I got to be responsible for him. And as a former teacher, I don't think your kids should be anywhere but with you. That's the best place for them to be. And so it's these aren't things that I think have to be permanent or they have to be temporary. I think for me and how I'm trying to show up for my team and my community is to just take people where they are and love them where they are and just do my best to fit in. Because 2021 has been harder for me than 2020 ever was. Y'all, I almost died. I had 3 blood clots and a major surgery in the last 90 days. Do you know what I'm saying? And it's because I'm here today because I just roll with the punches and I show up when I can show up, and when I can't, I can't, and when I'm not expecting people to make anything stick. I just want you not to die of COVID. We're still in a pandemic. You get what I'm saying? I just want to make sure you're okay. Are you hungry? Did you lose your job? Did your child learn to read? These are the things that are important to me right now. And so I'm just trying to really show up and just be like, I text John, I was like, I'm only going to be there 10 minutes early instead of 30. I'm sorry. Like, I'm just glad to be here today. Like, and just glad you're here and all like these amazing stories that you have. So I'm not really worried about what's going to stick right now. I'm worried about how do I stick with you? How do I stick with my community?
Well, I'm really glad that you're still here and everyone in this room. Catherine.
Hello. Yeah.
What do you think as far as things that you may have realized this past year that inspire you to kind of think about reimagining what we consider business as usual pre-COVID? What should we carry forward now that we've learned this past year as far as how we handle our business as usual?
Well, I mean, I can speak to it from very quickly from both a business owner's perspective and then also not being in charge of the show for the first time in many, many years. So, as a business owner, there were a lot of things that came to light. I'm the mother of a 14-year-old who was also schooling at home and was very lonely, but at the same time during the pandemic, taught me how to skateboard and I taught him how to do stuff. And it was finding joy again in the world around you and then bringing that back into the workplace and reminding the people that I worked with that it was important for them to find joy too, especially as at the same time, my work through Asheville Strong was showing me firsthand, like I was facing firsthand all of these stories of hardship and feeding people who were hungry and living in their cars and had been laid off and weren't going to be rehired and were struggling for days and weeks on end to apply for unemployment benefits and not seeing a check and didn't know when their lights were going to get turned off. And so being both, so like from a business owner's perspective and like reminding ourselves to find the joy and to be there in the now and to be nimble was hugely important. And I think bringing that flexibility to the team and that accessibility to share with one another what you need in a business and opening up your business so that your employees and your colleagues feel safe enough to voice what they need I think that's definitely going to stick. I think that the way we think about wellness has completely overhauled in the last year. And wellness is such a core foundation for how successful a business can be in the long run. Because if your people aren't healthy on all levels, your business isn't going to be healthy. It's not going to last. You can't face that much turnover or that much, or you're going to experience like a ripple effect in the productivity and the creativity and the passion that people bring to their work every day. So I see that as something that will definitely stick as a long-term impact is how we view wellness and how we make that accessible in our businesses. I think Nicole has really, created some great examples of how to do that well and how that can scale. It can scale on it doesn't matter if you're running a team of 2 or a team of 200. And then on the flip side, stepping out of a business owner's role and stepping into a place where I have a team and I have people taking care of me as an employee. I see the need for, over the past year, I think something that has really helped has been to ask, do we need this? Do we need this bell? Do we need this whistle? Is this diluting our human connection to one another and our message? Like, are we trying to make something shiny when we just need to make it real? And that has been something that I went into this new company with that marketing approach. And I think that that's something as well as just simplifying marketing messages, simplifying how you're communicating to people, even just doing the hard work of one-to-one selling or one-to-one marketing, picking up the phone and calling your last like, or your top, 50 customers or 100 customers, and just like saying hi and thank you and check in, just saying like, are you doing okay? How are you doing? That just creates like such long-term goodwill. So I think that so those two key things, right, is just thinking about how we define wellness and how we make wellness accessible to our teams in running a business, and how do we strip away stuff we don't need in our marketing and in our messaging and how we present our business. Everybody got stripped to their core last year, and I think a lot of people are looking at that and saying that it's okay. Like, this is who we really are. This is who I really am. This is how this person is really next to me, and having, good conversations around that, having real conversations.
Yeah, I definitely like what you said about, are we making this shiny or are we making it real? Because I think, the old school methods of like sales and marketing and design and, the interweaving of those was very much like make it shiny,
Can we make
perfect.
the logo bigger?
And, people are just tired of that bullshit. Like, give me something real. We have seen what is real, and people are more savvy. Like, they can see through it. It's like that doesn't work anymore in terms of marketing and design. So I think the democratization of all of that too, through social media and everything, like everyone is a content creator, and everyone it's becoming, everyone can design, and everyone should, and everyone can market, and everyone should, and the authenticity, I think, is really powerful.
Can we at some point talk about the challenge of having everything gone online in the last year at some point?
Sure.
Like, just briefly? Okay,
Yeah.
great.
I want to give Nathan a chance to chime in on what do you think we should carry forward in how we define business as usual?
Yeah. Well, those were tough acts to follow, guys. You had excellent answers to this question. And I think, the only thing that I would really add, and it sort of goes without saying, but, the discussion we've had today and like how open and vulnerable we've all been sharing our stories, I think the same panel discussion, whatever it might be, the spirit of that conversation 5 years ago would have been nothing like this. And I think the reason for that is, we've all just lived through a year of fighting a global pandemic, right? And in our lifetimes, I don't think we'll ever, hopefully, face a challenge like this again. And, nothing short of a alien invasion reaches this scale, right? We've all fought the same enemy for a year, right? And we've never really been in this place where we're all on the same page in that way. And so what I think in terms of marketing messaging and how that should evolve, fear-based tactics gone. I think, using this opportunity to be more human, to be more authentic in the messaging that we put out there, now's the time. We talked last year about looking at your brand values and reassessing those, seeing if you even have brand values, and leaning into that and making sure that you're reinforcing the things that matter to you. You guys have already said that in not so specific terms. And I think now's the time, going forward, we have to be willing to be more authentic, more vulnerable, and more genuine in the messaging that we put out there. So I think that's what I hope is the lasting effect of the pandemic. I think a lot of positive changes have happened. And I'm like Aisha, I'm cautiously optimistic. I hope it sticks around, but this is America, right? And we do shift our focus constantly. And so, using this opportunity as brands, as marketers, as creatives, as strategic folks, to capitalize on that shared mentality that we all have and the shared experience that we all have, to really resonate with folks and make sure that we truly engage and are authentic with the messaging that we put out.
I just want to, we keep talking about this the pandemic in the past year, but I just want to read through this list real quick that I just jotted down, because there was so much this past year, right? We had COVID. We had all the uncertainty that came from that. We had George Floyd and all of the coming of ahead, of all the history of racial injustice around that. There's this whole battle around masks, like of all things. And we had the election. We had an insurrection. Then, similarly to the masks, the vaccine, pro, against, whatever, lots of viewpoints there. And then now, finally turning a corner, we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and now we're kind of emerging from processing all of that shit. There's a lot.
I spoke to an infectious doctor at UNC Chapel Hill on the Asheville View. We were talking about vaccine hesitancy, and a pandemic means that we are still in this pandemic where we might be a little bit safer, where our numbers might be going down. Globally, this pandemic is still happening. And so that's one of the reasons I'm nervous about the stick, because you're right. This was the first time we were all on the same page, but the page is turning. And those people who are constantly left behind continue to get left behind, because the people who lost their jobs that you talked about, who won't get their jobs back, we don't know where they are just because things are opening back up for some industries or for some people. So we have to be mindful of, this is a pandemic, which means all of us are in it, even the people that we can't see and we're not necessarily interacting with every day, that this is still very real, and there are going to be communities that are marginalized because of it, that we, in our own Asheville, where we live, where we work, and we won't see their pain and their struggle.
Yeah. So I do want to make sure we leave. It's about 2:00. We've got about 30 minutes left. And of course, if anybody needs to take a bio break or anything, please feel free to do what you need to do at any point, including our panelists. But I do want to open it up for some Q&A, both with the room and through the chat. So if you're on Zoom, please feel free to drop some questions into the chat. We do have a couple that came in on Facebook earlier too that we can tackle. And I know Catherine wants to talk about how hard it was switching to going to online. So having said that, does anybody have any questions that they would like to throw out for our panelists? So many. Okay.
So your comments about giving people something real.
Hold on 1 second. I'm sorry. I'm realizing, just for the benefit of the Zoom people, let me hand you a microphone.
Okay.
So that
So much pressure. No, I love an audience. This is fine. So, question about comments about giving people something real and authenticity. So I'm a consultant to some very conservative clients, accountants, tech executives, attorneys, that type of market. And it's kind of weird because I'm a full-time digital nomad who's just a crazy person and moves all over the world, but they still hire me, thank gosh. I'm very comfortable on social media. They are not. And it's been interesting during COVID where we all simultaneously started going online all day long. But of course, example, during 2020 in the election, huge backlash against social media. Nobody trusts Facebook anymore, and there's that. So there's two different, it's almost simultaneously moving in two different directions. And I wondered what your thoughts were on how we're going to use those platforms moving forward in terms of developing real relationships and real connections. Do you see an improvement in that, or is it just going to be the same thing for the foreseeable future?
So I'm getting word that it's a little hard to hear for the Zoom people, so I'm going to try and paraphrase and correct me if I'm wrong. But you're trying to ask essentially how to sort of keep the various digital channels, how to use those to build authentic, meaningful kind of one-on-one connections.
Is there hope to do so?
Is there hope to do so, to use digital channels to build authentic relationships with your clients or your market? Anybody want to tackle that one?
I think so. I think that how you set up your group. So research says that your money is in your list. So you should be making money like a certain dollar amount per people who are on your list. So if you're nurturing that list in real conversation and real community with that list, then you can make it work. If you have a Facebook group and you're active in that group, you can make it work. If you have a LinkedIn group, because what we're learning is people want to be in community. They identify with the communities that they're in. And so I think that when you look at the feed of Facebook, like just general Facebook, why would I trust you? Why should I trust you? I got the Russians trying to steal the election. I got, people trying to pit people against each other. But in those groups where people have built trust, where you're in constant conversation and you're not just throwing your message up like a SOS, right? I think there is real consideration and concern. And when I look back at my numbers, like I'll tell you that at the Lenore Ryan Equity and Diversity Institute, it was partners of the Institute that bought those classes first, because they already had a relationship with Lenore Ryan, or they already had a relationship with me, and they trusted either me or they trusted Lenore Ryan. I would say for Equity Over Everything, we haven't missed a beat because we have a community of people that we trust and we see and we show up for over and over and over again. So I really do think it's about building strong communities and really showing up in those communities when it's not time to sell, but when it's time to donate for the Little League uniforms, or when it's time to have a conversation about COVID, or when it's time to show up for whatever's happening in the community. Like really showing up and being a part of a community and raising people to rally around what it is that you're doing and the importance of it, that mission, vision, and values, is how you keep people connected. So when I go on to Facebook, there's about 7 groups I visit, whether they pop on my feed or not, because I know that the value is there. I know that the person is showing up there and they're really interested in connecting for real, and I stay connected.
And I'll just add in quickly, I think, when you're talking to these clients and thinking about their marketing message and how they're going to engage and connect with their audience, it's best to, of course, incorporate social media and make that part of your mix, but not think of that in a siloed fashion, right? Like you need to echo one of the things Aisha said, ask them to reassess their values and see who they can connect with to, sponsor community events. And, that sponsorship is going to reflect those values if they're, connecting with folks and sponsoring things that resonate and that are important to them, and making sure that their social media messaging reflects, this effort that they're putting out into the community to truly connect, and making sure that social presence drives traffic down to more authentic places where you control the conversation. So, their website, their e-newsletter, things like that, where you're not getting this mix and this noise, of the craziness that can happen within the social vertical. So I think, diversifying that and making sure that, one, they assess those values and create a strategy to address that and make sure that message gets out there. And then they just stay authentic no matter where they're communicating, whether it's in social or what have you.
I'd love to just quickly add to that too, that so there's there's some key basic principles with social media and with these clients who it sounds like they're conservative, like maybe they're shy of posting or being out there and vulnerable and real.
Yeah, they, a lot of them are older.
Okay.
And aren't that comfortable on the platform, and a lot of them do not understand the concept of, social media maybe being at the top of the funnel,
Mm-hmm.
and you need to drill down and try to pull those people off of the authentic conversations. Trying to teach them that is tricky, and I still remember back in I think October, one of my clients was trying to convince me to start advertising on Parler. And I was like, with all due respect, I'm not touching that platform right now.
Yeah.
So it's been just like
Okay.
it's been an interesting battle.
Yeah. So, so gently reminding them that first off, social is at the top of the funnel. And I always try to remind people too that it's dangerous to put all of your eggs in one basket and to just concentrate on one platform, because that platform could be shut down overnight. Your account could get hacked and shut down overnight. And so again, driving home the points of getting those, starting the conversation there, and then continuing the conversation on your own channels of email and your website is definitely the way to do it. And to try to take a little bit of the pressure off, I think, it's really important to remind them that if they're just, it can be really, it can be kind of anxious to post anything in this day and age, because you never know when something you say is going to suddenly just generate 10 comments and somebody's going to try to cancel you or whatever, or criticize you. And I'm not even going to get that conversation of criticism versus cancellation, but because that's a hot mess. But but I will say that not being afraid to, don't put too much pressure on creation, and just allow yourself to document. You're just documenting. You're documenting the good work that you're doing for other people. You're documenting your day in service to others as a business. And you're not, again, it's how do we strip away the shiny and get to the real, and just taking all of that pressure off your shoulders and allowing your shoulders to drop and just saying, I'm just going to document through the day a couple of things that happened in business today, and then making that call to action for occasionally for someone to sign up for the newsletter, or to go visit a blog, or to go visit the website. There was one other point I was going to make, and now I'm completely forgetting it. But yeah, so it's just getting to that point and relieving that pressure, I think is really can be really helpful for folks, and especially who work in those more publicly conservative roles, where they can't share too much information about what they do and can't be all over the place, right? Because they probably feel like they have to present a very specific, level of decorum or professionalism in what they do.
And I was just gonna say, not just what they feel like that, but I know for some of the professions, they have strict lines. Lawyers can't say I'm better lawyer than you. That's why I didn't go into the legal field, because I want to be better than somebody. So I think really letting them know that you understand those parts of it up front, and that you are gonna stick in those guidelines, because every lawyer that I ever talked to about social media freaks out because of that. Every financial planner I talk to freaks out. Anybody who has to deal with HIPAA. So, really letting them know that you have the expertise to keep them from having to deal with another thing on top of all the things that we've talked about today. I just wanted to add that I thought that was what you were gonna say.
Yes, thank you.
So we had somebody, there's some overlap of some things here. So one of the people in the chat basically said, in future marketing efforts, do you think folks don't want to hear about COVID anymore? Is everybody sick of it?
Yes.
Yes, of course. And Mikey Spice was in the room, he just stepped out, but he had also put a question in on Facebook that relates to this. Which is, during COVID, a lot of businesses pivoted their marketing budget over to digital because everybody was stuck on their screens. And now as we're moving back to, quote unquote, regular life, have businesses continue those same digital marketing strategies, or should they continue those same strategies, or should we be sort of moving back to previous methods? And I think that all ties into also being sick of being online and how hard that was. So tackle that however, which way you want to come at it from.
Which one do you want to do first?
Anybody burning to jump on that?
Take it away.
Oh, gosh. yes, everybody's sick of hearing about COVID. And I think, focusing narrowly on that is really not where anybody needs to be right now. But, we've talked a lot today about being authentic and being human. And I think there are a lot of different ways to do that. I think people are excited about the opportunity for connection, the renewed opportunity for connection now. And so, one of the most human things we can do in terms of communication is be humorous, be a little bit light. Like, we're all really tired of the heavy, and carrying all this for so long. So, use that opportunity to engage with your audience in that way. And I also think, we've already talked a bit too about, new methods of marketing and solely being focused on digital. I know we certainly leaned on digital very heavily because things could change at any moment. And maybe we need to go completely dark, or maybe we need to change that message just slightly that's out there in the marketing mix. And we can do that in 24 hours and shift that with digital. But, we've talked a lot about sponsoring community events and getting involved in community events. To get back to that original point I made of people being excited about connection, I think that's a great opportunity for folks to get engaged with these things that are happening so rapid fire now. And sorry, but we still have to stay nimble and stay on top of these things because stuff is happening so quickly now as we reemerge, right? So I think that is also another sort of lasting effect of the pandemic is we have to stay nimble. We have to continue to engage and communicate and make sure that we reach people where they are.
I think we're tired of hearing about COVID in the way that it's been being presented. But I think people want to hear the positive stories that have come out of COVID, that they want to hear how your business is different because of COVID. They want to understand what you're going to take with you. So I don't think people are necessarily tired of hearing about COVID. I think we're ready for when you have a story arc, right? There are different parts of that story. And we want to move away from the conflict towards the resolution. And I think we have to tell the full story. As marketers, our job is to be good storytellers. I don't think the story of COVID is done. I think we have to keep telling the story, but it's up to us to be nimble and smarter and better and more inventive of how we show up. Again, there are people who still are suffering because of COVID. So we want to acknowledge who they are and bring them into our community and speak for them. So I don't think we have to give up on COVID in general, but I think we do need to think about the juju that we put out in our marketing as it relates to COVID, which is, I think, a lot of what you've been saying today, Nathan.
Yeah, I'll add to that really quickly that I think it's that people have been hearing a lot of don't do this, don't go here, don't say this, don't be this. Where we are entering that next chapter of here is, some people were like, okay, we need to start having the conversation of how do we live with COVID, not how do we beat COVID, but how do we live with it and how do we thrive, beyond it, knowing that it's still around us, despite it. And I think that that's the question that we ask ourselves when we're thinking about those messaging and marketing strategies and positioning strategies is, how is our business answering that question or entering into that conversation? It just kind of reminds me of, there is a feeling of hope, and there's a feeling of knowing that, recognizing that there's a struggle. So for example, it's like I went through long COVID. I've been struggling with long COVID and was really, really sick last year. And the other day I went swimming at the community pool, shout out to the Gaseous Creek Road pool, my favorite. And I went there and I was able to swim a whole lap without feeling like I was going to pass out. And I could feel my lungs building back the strength that I had lost over the last year. And I felt suddenly like, oh my gosh, it's possible. It is possible for me to thrive in this life after going through so much and having, myself even saying, I'm never going to be able to do this again. I'm not going to be able to clock miles on the treadmill. I'm not going to be able to run on a trail.
if you can bring that feeling of rebuilding and hope and emerging and but recognizing, like knowing that struggle is there and recognizing that struggle in your in the business conversations that you're having is going to be good, and without using like the hashtag better together or whatever, because we're all so sick of that.
I will add to that I think when you guys were all talking, I was thinking, I'm okay with hearing the struggles people had during it too. It's like, I don't want to hear generically about it anymore. I want to hear like the real resilience or the real struggle or I want the really authentic answer. I don't want you to just like, oh, it was fine. It's fine. It's hard. It's fine. I want to hear like the real story from it. So even if, I was looking on social media and someone was saying their struggle, I would connect with that. Or they're saying how resilient, they've become because of it, or the good that's come out of it, how she was feeling about her lung capacity. And it's like it's not, yes, we're all sick of the word. Like we're all just sick of what it is and what the word is. And we would love to just never look back at it and just kind of ignore that it ever happened. But I do really like hearing the truth of what people have been going through. And I think everybody kind of feels that way, just like that human connection, just being like, oh yeah, I get that. I can feel that. I understand that, And business wise, someone was saying that too, right? That we love hearing, like, I love hearing businesses that close. I feel really sorry for them, and I like hearing their story and like what they plan on doing and where they're going and how they tried and how they, all of it, just the real human story, not the surface level. The concern that I have now is that we've all been going through that struggle. And then now I feel like we're supposed to just jump right back into what it was. And like no one, or I don't know if anyone has, but I haven't been able to process what has happened. I don't feel like I've really, like, do we need a support group to like talk about what, because it's like that happened and it's still happening. It's still going on. Like, and then we're just jumping back into soccer games and, all the things. And it just feels very unsettling,
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, just coming back to that list I read, like, that was all stuff that we had to process in varying degrees of isolation and very polarizing conditions, both online and, within our own families and friends, and as a country. We've never had like a truth and reconciliation process in this country. And now add in all this other stuff, like Sarah made a comment here, it seems like we need to just like create spaces for people to like share their experience and work through that together. And I think on the marketing side, like anyone who is doing marketing, design, putting content out there, like there's a responsibility that comes with that. And we can be mindful to put out the kind of content that we're talking about. And also as consumers, we can be mindful of how we engage with the content that we want to be fed, right? So if you see that kind of content and it does resonate with you, engaging with that content will A, make the algorithms give you more of that kind of content, and B, make the people producing that content realize, oh, this is getting a response. I should do more of this, because our capitalistic society is going, and our normal ways of marketing are going to put a lot of pressure on us to just jump right back in to the way things were and back to the hustle and the grind and working too much and disregarding your health and all of that. So let's forget about racism too and all that and just go back to business. So I think that we need to be mindful of that from both sides on creating and consuming content going forward. We are getting down to the official stop time. Does anybody else in the audience have anything else they would like to ask our panelists?
Anything like really specific to your particular business? Go ahead, please. I talk too much already.
I was just sitting here watching you all on Zoom while you're also talking to us, and it was like I'm getting a stress reaction thinking about that. But I think that's just because I personally.
feel stressed.
Okay.
I'm
sorry to even bring it up.
No, we're here, like we're sisters. I feel that.
So I'm wondering what, if anything, you have, I mean, as far as, Zoom is something that I don't think is going to go away. And it has its place. I'm wondering what you picked up on in this last year, I guess specific to marketing, that was out of necessity, but you think is going to stick, or that you really love, or that you don't want to go away.
So just for the benefit of the people on Zoom, the person in the audience is basically acknowledging the fact that we're like doing this live and on Zoom, and like that's stressing her out, and it's stressing us out too. So she's curious what things came out of necessity this past year, like having to go online that we think will stick and carry forward. And this could be an opportunity, Catherine, for you to talk about how hard it was to go to all online at once too.
Well, I think that, I think it's been a struggle because all of a sudden we saw this huge influx of all businesses having to go online. And so suddenly you already had a very noisy world become even noisier online. And I don't know about anybody else in the room, but my creativity freaking plummeted during the pandemic. I thought I write fiction and essays and stuff. And I thought, oh, I'm going to have, some more time to write and like really kind of stretch my creative wings. And like, by the end of the day, just from being online, I was like a shell of myself, like just trying to serve, like, because all of these things and like this whole conversation been imprinted upon me like all day long. Right. But I think one thing that I know everybody started getting Zoomed out. We all started, we had the Zoom happy hours and everybody was on the Zoom happy hour like every day for like the first 8 weeks of the pandemic. And then those stopped. I think that there were two things for me that I think will stick out of the pandemic. One is TikTok. TikTok saved my life during the pandemic. I could not have gone through that emotionally and mentally without getting on there and watching like 15 minutes of funny cat videos and like, and also too, TikTok, I think also ushered in during Black Lives Matter. TikTok was a huge player in bringing what was happening in real time all around the entire country front and center to a place where it was, Twitter can only do so much breaking news, but I feel like TikTok was really bringing it to a new generation. So I think that the way that platforms react in real time and like are able to bring stuff, like I think that video in real time is only going to get better and got better out of necessity from the pandemic. And then the second thing that I think came out of the pandemic that's going to stick is recognizing how short-sighted businesses have been in providing accessibility to people with disabilities. People who are vision impaired, hearing impaired, people who are physically impaired. I think that's been, that was a big conversation that hopefully will stick, and that businesses will see how they can optimize their websites, their meetings, their experiences to accommodate more of their employees and more of their colleagues and clients and customers that way.
Now, we are
Sorry.
we're just past 2:30 now, so I do want to be respectful. I'm sorry, I was on mute. I almost made it through the whole thing without talking on mute, but perfect way to come to the end of this hybrid event. So I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I do want to kind of wrap this up for the online. Thank you, everyone who joined us online. Shout out to Hugh Weber, glad to see you here. And for our in-person audience, feel free to stick around and mingle as you're able, or cut out and do what you got to do. I just want to thank everyone, thank our panelists for joining us, thank everyone for coming and joining us in person and online. And with that, I guess I will bring it to a close and feel free to hang out for a little bit.
Let's give another round of applause for our amazing panel.